My sister emptied our parents' accounts for her wedding. The bank president called me, ma'am, at the ceremony. You'll be seated at table 12, with the distant cousins, Rachel said, barely looking up from her designer wedding planner as she handed me the gilded seating card. I stood frozen in my parents' living room, the spring sunlight streaming through the windows illuminating thousands of dollars in floral arrangements that somehow matched the newly emptied balance of our parents' retirement accounts. Table 12? I repeated, my financial advisor brain already calculating the distance from the main wedding party. That's practically in another zip code. Rachel flashed her perfect smile, the same one she used in sponsored posts that paid for her Botox, but apparently not her wedding. Don't be dramatic, Emma. Everyone has their place. Besides, Mom and Dad want their investment in this day to be perfect. Investment. The word hung in the air like a guillotine. Speaking of investments, I said carefully, have you seen the statement from their accounts? The one showing zero balances as of last Tuesday? Her diamond ring caught the light as she waved dismissively. They offered Emma, this is the biggest day of my life. They're 68 years old, Rachel. That money was supposed to last them 20 more years. Don't worry. She patted my shoulder condescendingly. You're good with money. You'll figure something out for them. 24 hours later, as I sat at table 12 watching my sister float down the aisle in a gown that cost more than my car, Victoria Winters, the president of Oak Ridge Community Bank where my parents had faithfully saved for decades, leaned over and whispered, "What will you do about this situation, ma'am?" Ma'am? The respect in her voice was unmistakable. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. This was about ensuring my sister learned that family loyalty runs deeper than account balances. And I was about to teach her that lesson in spectacular fashion. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Part 1. The Betrayal and Awakening. The first hint that something was wrong came 3 months before Rachel's wedding. I'd stopped by our parents' modest ranch-style home in Lakeside for our traditional Sunday dinner, something Rachel rarely attended anymore since becoming micro-famous on social media. Mom seemed distracted, Dad quieter than usual. The chicken was slightly overcooked, unprecedented for Marie Davis, who had taught home economics for 30 years. Everything okay with you two? I asked, helping Mom clear the dishes while Dad retreated to his recliner earlier than usual. Just wedding stress, Mom said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Your sister has expensive taste. I laughed. That's putting it mildly. But you guys aren't paying for it, right? Isn't Ethan's family handling most of it? They've got that real estate empire. Mom's hands stilled in the soapy water. Well, we wanted to contribute. It's our daughter's wedding. Something in her tone made me pause. Mom, how much are you contributing? Just what we can afford, she said, but wouldn't meet my eyes. 2 weeks later, I was helping Dad organize his home office, another Sunday ritual since he'd struggled with paperwork after his minor stroke last year. That's when I found it. Their quarterly retirement account statement, opened but hastily stuffed under a stack of magazines. Where there should have been a comfortable 6-figure sum, the result of 40 years of careful saving on teachers' salaries, there was instead a balance of $12,283. Dad, I said, my heart pounding, what happened to your retirement money? He looked up, confused at first, then resigned. Your mother and I made a decision. Rachel needed help with the wedding, and Ethan's parents were only paying for the venue and catering. Only the venue and catering? Dad, that's usually the biggest expense. Well, there's the dress, the flowers, the photographer, the honeymoon in the Maldives. He trailed off, looking suddenly older. How much did you give her? I asked, though I already knew the answer from the statement in my hand. Almost everything, he admitted quietly. She said it was an investment in her future with Ethan, that connections from this wedding would benefit all of us. I bit back my first response, which would have included several finance terms not suitable for my gentle father's ears. Instead, I asked, "Does she understand this was your retirement? The money you need to live on?" Dad's hands trembled slightly. She said we could move in with them when they buy their house next year. The image of my parents living in a guest room at the mercy of my self-absorbed sister and her equally narcissistic husband-to-be made my stomach turn. My parents, who had saved every penny, who had chosen public schools for Rachel and me so they could fund our college educations, who drove the same car for 15 years at a time, reduced to dependence because of one extravagant wedding. I hugged Dad and promised I'd figure something out, my mind already racing. As a financial advisor at Meridian Financial Partners, I dealt with money problems every day, just not usually ones that hit so close to home. That evening, I called Rachel from my downtown condo. Her response was even worse than I'd anticipated. "They offered, Emma," she said, the sounds of a nail salon evident in the background. "I didn't force them." "You know they can't afford to give you over $300,000, I countered. That's literally their entire retirement fund. It's an investment in my brand. Once Ethan and I are married, my influencer partnerships will triple. His family knows everyone in Chicago." "And what about Mom and Dad in the meantime? Dad's medication alone costs—" "You're just jealous," she cut me off. "You've always resented that I'm the one in the spotlight while you're pushing papers in some boring office. This wedding is my moment, and I won't let you ruin it with your negativity." The call ended with her hanging up on me. I sat in stunned silence, staring out at the lakeside skyline from my small balcony. Rachel and I had never been close. She was 5 years older and had always been the golden child, beautiful and charismatic, while I was the serious, responsible one. But this level of selfishness shocked even me. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. Jackson Chen, my colleague who specialized in financial fraud, noticed my distraction as we prepared for a client meeting. "Earth to Emma," he said, waving, a prospectus in front of me. "You've been reading the same page for 15 minutes. I hesitated before confiding in him. Jackson and I had developed a solid professional friendship over the 3 years we'd worked together, but I rarely discussed personal matters at the office. Something about his steady reliability made me take the risk. Over lunch in the empty conference room, I outlined the situation. Jackson listened without interrupting, his analytical mind visibly processing each detail. "So your sister effectively drained your parents' accounts for a one-day event, and they have no real retirement plan now," he summarized when I finished. "Exactly. And she doesn't seem to care or understand the severity." Jackson thoughtfully stirred his tea. "You know, this reminds me of a case I worked on before joining Meridian. It wasn't family, but it had similar elements. Betrayal of trust, financial exploitation, someone leveraging relationship dynamics for personal gain." "How did it end?" I asked. "Well," he said carefully, "the perpetrator learned that financial systems have built-in protections and accountability mechanisms that personal relationships sometimes lack. The money was eventually recovered." Something about his measured tone piqued my interest. "You're not telling me everything." Jackson smiled slightly. "Let's just say the resolution was elegant and educational for all involved. The key was understanding the systems at play and finding the leverage points." That night, I couldn't sleep. Jackson's words kept replaying in my mind. Systems, leverage points, elegant resolution. By morning, the first seedlings of a plan had taken root. Over the next week, I did something I'd never done before. I took 5 personal days from work. My boss was surprised. I hadn't taken a vacation in 2 years, but approved it immediately. My spare bedroom, usually reserved for occasional visits from college friends, transformed into what looked like a scene from a detective show. Financial statements, wedding vendor contracts, and family photos covered every surface. I started with the basics. How had Rachel actually transferred the money? A visit to my parents' house revealed the answer through bank statements and electronic transfer confirmations. Rachel had accompanied Mom and Dad to Oak Ridge Community Bank, where they'd banked for 30 years, and helped them execute a series of transfers to vendors for the wedding. But something wasn't right about the amounts. A $45,000 transfer for flowers, $22,000 for a photographer, $38,000 for a wedding dress. The numbers seemed inflated even for a luxury wedding. And then there were transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, with vague descriptions like wedding coordination and event management. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I needed more information, but I couldn't get it from my parents without alarming them further. That's when I remembered Victoria Winters, the president of Oak Ridge Community Bank. Mom and Dad had known her for years. She'd even attended my college graduation party. Victoria agreed to meet me for coffee away from the bank. Her face registered immediate concern when I explained the purpose of our meeting. "I was there when they made those transfers," she confirmed, her elegant gray bob swinging as she shook her head. "I tried to counsel them, Emma. I really did. I even suggested they consult with you first." "What did Rachel say?" Victoria's lips thinned. "She told them it was just bank protocol and that I was being overly cautious because of my position. She assured them the investments would be so worth it when they saw the wedding." "Did you notice anything unusual about the transfers?" Victoria hesitated, professional discretion warring with personal concern. "I can't share specific account details, but I will say this. Some of the vendor names didn't match up with the reputation of the wedding being planned. The florist, for instance. I know the premium florists in Lakeside, and Bloom Concepts isn't one of them." I felt a chill. "Would you recognize the name of Rachel's wedding planner?" "Sophia Reynolds," Victoria said immediately. "Very exclusive, very expensive, though I wasn't aware she worked with Bloom Concepts." A quick internet search later revealed that Bloom Concepts had been incorporated just 3 months ago, right? Around when Rachel's wedding planning kicked into high gear. Its registered address was a P.O. box, and its only client appeared to be my sister's wedding. That evening, I called Olivia Torres, my best friend since college, and the only person in my social circle who had remained uncharmed by Rachel over the years. "I need a favor," I said when she answered. "It's about Rachel's wedding." "Let me guess," Olivia replied. "You need emotional support to get through watching her marry that walking cologne advertisement?" I laughed, despite myself. "Not exactly, I need information. You work in event marketing. Do you know anyone in the high-end wedding industry who might talk to me about standard pricing and vendors?" Olivia's connections proved invaluable. By the end of the week, I had a clear picture of what a luxury wedding should cost in Lakeside, and the numbers didn't match what had left my parents' accounts. Even accounting for the most extravagant options, there was still nearly $100,000 unaccounted for. The next piece fell into place when Jackson forwarded me an article about social media influencers laundering money through fake business expenses. "Thought this might be relevant to your situation," his email said simply. I stared at my evidence wall, connecting threads between bank statements, vendor information, and Rachel's recent social media posts. As a financial advisor, I was trained to spot patterns, to follow money trails, to understand the stories that numbers tell. And the story here was becoming clearer. Rachel hadn't just accepted my parents' retirement money for her wedding. She had inflated costs, created shell vendors, and likely pocketed a significant portion for herself. But why? Rachel and Ethan weren't hurting for money. Her influencer deals brought in substantial income, and his family was genuinely wealthy. The answer came from an unexpected source: my mother. During a quick visit to drop off groceries, I found her looking through old photo albums. "Remember this?" she asked, pointing to a picture of Rachel at 18, holding up an acceptance letter. She was so excited to get into Parsons School of Design. I nodded, remembering the day clearly. Rachel had dreamed of becoming a fashion designer, had even shown remarkable talent for it. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we could have afforded it," Mom said wistfully. "But with your father's medical bills that year, and the roof repair." The realization hit me like a thunderbolt. Rachel had been forced to attend the state university instead, where she'd abandoned design for marketing and discovered her talent for self-promotion. While I had received a full scholarship to Northwestern 4 years later, Rachel had always had to compromise on her dream. Was this wedding, this excessive over-the-top spectacle, Rachel's way of finally having the life she thought had been denied her? Was she punishing our parents for choices made out of financial necessity years ago? Understanding her motivation didn't excuse her actions, but it gave me insight into what might actually affect her. Rachel didn't just want money. She wanted validation, recognition, the spotlight she felt she deserved. With the engagement party scheduled for the following weekend at the Lakeside Country Club, I had limited time to finalize my plan. I called Jackson again. "I need your expertise on something," I said when he answered. "How would one track money that's been moved through shell companies back to its original source?" His silence spoke volumes. "Emma, are you sure about what you're considering? There could be serious implications." "I'm not planning anything illegal," I assured him. "Just a lesson in financial accountability." After a long pause, Jackson sighed. "Meet me at the coffee shop near your place in an hour. And bring all your documentation." By the time the engagement party arrived, I was ready. The Lakeside Country Club ballroom sparkled with champagne flutes and designer outfits. Rachel held court near the dance floor, resplendent in a white jumpsuit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Ethan stood beside her, handsome and polished in that generic way of men who've never had to worry about money. I wore a simple black dress, elegant but understated, with my grandmother's pearl necklace. As I moved through the crowd, I made sure to speak with key people: Victoria Winters, who had been invited due to her social standing in Lakeside; Sophia Reynolds, the wedding planner who seemed surprised to see me approach her directly; and most importantly, Ethan's parents, Margaret and Robert Miller. "Your son and my sister make a beautiful couple," I said as I joined them near the bar. "Indeed they do," Margaret replied with the practiced warmth of old money. "We're so looking forward to joining our families." "As am I," said, sipping my champagne, though I admit I've been concerned about my parents' contribution to the wedding. Robert Miller's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, I thought everything was proceeding according to plan. That's what Ethan tells us." "I'm sure it is," I smiled. "It's just that my parents are retired teachers. Their contribution represents their entire retirement savings." The shock on the Millers' faces was genuine. "Surely not," Margaret said. "Ethan told us they were comfortable and wanted to participate, but we'd never have expected." "I believe Rachel may have misrepresented the situation," I said gently, "to everyone involved." As I moved away from the Millers, I caught Rachel watching me with narrowed eyes. When our gazes met, I raised my glass slightly in her direction. The game had begun. The engagement party marked a turning point. Rachel must have sensed something had changed, because she called me the very next morning. "What were you telling Ethan's parents?" she demanded without preamble. "Just getting to know my future in-laws," I replied calmly. "They seem concerned about Mom and Dad's financial situation." Her voice hardened. "Stay out of this, Emma. you've always been jealous of what I have. I won't let you ruin the most important day of my life. I don't want to ruin anything, I said truthfully. I just want to make sure Mom and Dad are taken care of. They're going to need somewhere to live when their house is foreclosed on in 6 months. The silence on the other end told me I'd hit my mark. What are you talking about? Rachel finally asked. Well, they've taken a second mortgage to cover some of the costs you didn't include in your original estimate. Didn't they tell you? I guess they didn't want to worry you before the wedding. It was a calculated risk, this lie. My parents hadn't actually taken a second mortgage, yet. But based on my projections of their remaining finances, they would need to consider it soon if their situation didn't change. Rachel's voice lost some of its edge. They never said anything. Well, that's Mom and Dad for you, always putting their children first. I paused deliberately. I'm sure once you're married, you and Ethan will help them out. That's what family does, right? After we hung up, I sat on my balcony watching the sun set over Lakeside. Phase 1 was complete, planting the seed, creating doubt. Now I needed to nurture it into the harvest I planned. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparations, both Rachel's for her big day and mine for what would follow. I maintained a careful balance, playing the role of the dutiful, if not especially close sister, while building my case brick by meticulous brick. I volunteered to help with various wedding tasks, which gave me access to vendor contracts and payment schedules. I spent time with my parents, subtly documenting their financial situation and gathering evidence of the transfers. I even joined Rachel for a bridesmaid's lunch, where I listened attentively as she boasted about the wedding details to her fashionable friends. The flowers alone are setting us back $50,000, she told them, not noticing my slight smile at the confirmation of the inflated figure I'd already uncovered. All the while, I worked with Jackson to trace the money trail, following it through the shell companies Rachel had created back to several personal accounts. The picture that emerged was worse than I'd initially suspected. Of the $340,000 my parents had transferred, nearly $120,000 had been diverted to accounts only Rachel could access. 3 days before the wedding, Victoria Winters called me. Emma? I've been reviewing some information based on our conversation, and I think we need to meet. Today, if possible. We met at her office after hours. Victoria looked troubled as she closed the door behind me. I can't share specific details due to confidentiality, she began. But I've uncovered some irregularities that concern me both professionally and personally. Your parents have been loyal customers for decades, and I feel I owe them a duty of care beyond the standard banking relationship. She slid a folder across her desk. This contains information about protected accounts for seniors, financial abuse warning signs, and the contact information for our Elder Financial Protection Unit. Hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to protect vulnerable adults from exploitation, these resources would be relevant. I understood what she was offering, not direct intervention, which would violate banking protocols, but a pathway to address what we both recognized as financial abuse. Thank you, I said, taking the folder. Hypothetically speaking, when might be an appropriate time to utilize such resources? Victoria's eyes met mine steadily. Financial protection cases are most effectively addressed when evidence is recent and comprehensive. A moment when all relevant parties might be present would be ideal. As I left the bank, the final pieces of my plan locked into place. Rachel had chosen the opulent Lakeside Grand Hotel for her wedding, a venue that regularly hosted dignitaries and celebrities. The ceremony would take place in the garden pavilion overlooking the lake, followed by a reception in the grand ballroom. Over 300 guests had been invited, including local society figures, Ethan's business connections, and Rachel's social media collaborators. It would be, as Rachel had repeated endlessly, the event of the season. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect as if even the weather was following Rachel's carefully curated plan. I arrived early at my parents' house to help them prepare, my heart aching at the sight of Mom carefully counting cash from an envelope for the hairdresser's tip, a small amount she clearly couldn't afford to spare. "You look beautiful," I told her as she fussed with her conservative blue dress, the one she'd worn to my college graduation and carefully preserved for special occasions. "Do you think it's too plain?" she asked anxiously. Rachel said most of the mothers would be wearing designer outfits. "It's perfect," I assured her, helping her fasten her single strand of pearls, a 30th anniversary gift from Dad that she treasured. "You look elegant and appropriate." At the venue, chaos reigned. Rachel was sequestered in the bridal suite, surrounded by her 6 bridesmaids, a makeup artist, a hairstylist, a photographer, and a videographer. I was allowed in briefly to deliver Mom's handkerchief, something borrowed for the ceremony, and found my sister transformed into a vision, in white satin and lace, her dress cascading around her like a cloud. For a moment, seeing her there in the late morning light, I hesitated. She looked genuinely happy, her expression softer than I'd seen it in years. Was I really going to disrupt what should be the happiest day of her life? Then I noticed the fresh flowers being delivered to the suite, arrangements that certainly hadn't cost the $45,000 that had left my parents' account, and my resolve hardened. This wasn't about ruining Rachel's day. It was about justice for our parents and perhaps a long overdue lesson for my sister. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m. At 3:30, guests began filing into the garden pavilion, where rows of white chairs faced an arbor dripping with orchids and roses. I helped seat my parents in the front row, reserved for immediate family, then took my assigned position at the far end of the second row, close enough to be family, far enough to signal my peripheral importance to the bride. Victoria Winters arrived in a tasteful gray suit, her position as a respected community figure earning her a seat in the 5th row. Our eyes met briefly as she took her place, her slight nod confirming that everything was prepared. As the string quartet began playing and the procession started, I surveyed the gathered crowd. Ethan's parents sat opposite mine, elegant and composed. The wedding party lined up, the groomsmen in classic black tuxedos, the bridesmaids in varying shades of blush that complemented their carefully selected bouquets. Ethan took his place under the arbor, looking appropriately nervous and happy. The music changed to the traditional wedding march, and Rachel appeared on our father's arm at the end of the aisle. There was an audible gasp from the assembled guests. Rachel was radiant, her dress catching the golden late-afternoon light, her smile wide and genuine as she locked eyes with Ethan. Dad looked proud but fragile as he escorted her slowly down the aisle. The cost of this moment, this walk, this dress, this entire spectacle, was written in the new lines around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hand as he placed Rachel's fingers into Ethan's waiting palm. The ceremony proceeded beautifully. The officiant spoke of love and commitment. Rachel and Ethan exchanged heartfelt vows. Rings were presented on a satin pillow by Ethan's young nephew. As they sealed their union with a kiss, applause erupted from the guests. I joined in, clapping as the newlyweds turned to face their friends and family for the first time as husband and wife. Rachel's eyes swept the crowd, absorbing the adoration, until they landed briefly on me. I smiled genuinely. This moment, at least, I could celebrate with her. The reception began with cocktails in the hotel's atrium while the wedding party took photographs. I mingled appropriately, congratulating Ethan's parents, chatting with distant relatives, and positioning myself near the entrance to the grand ballroom where dinner would be served. Victoria found me there, champagne flute in hand. "Beautiful." "Ceremony," she commented. "It was," I agreed. "Very expensive." "Indeed." She glanced around to ensure we weren't overheard. "Everything is in place. Are you certain about this?" I took a steadying breath. "I am. It's not about punishing Rachel. It's about protecting my parents." Victoria nodded. I understand. The bank's elder protection officer is here as you requested, discreetly positioned at table 20. The reception was a masterpiece of luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with towering floral arrangements. A 10-piece band played from a raised platform. The meal featured 5 courses of gourmet cuisine paired with expensive wines. And through it all, I waited for my moment. It came during the traditional father-daughter dance. As Rachel and Dad swayed to "What a Wonderful World," I slipped away to the hotel's business center where I'd prearranged access to a computer. 5 minutes later, I returned to my assigned table, number 12, far from the main wedding party, where I'd been seated with second cousins and Rachel's former co-workers. The toasts began soon after. Ethan's best man delivered a charming speech full of inside jokes and genuine warmth. Rachel's maid of honor gushed about their friendship and Rachel's perfectionism. Then, unexpectedly, the wedding planner approached my table. "The father of the bride has requested that you offer a toast," Sophia whispered, looking as surprised as I felt. "There's been a change to the program." I stood slowly, uncertain. This hadn't been part of the plan. Rachel had been explicit that I wouldn't be speaking at the reception. As I made my way to the microphone, I caught my father's eye. He nodded encouragingly, and suddenly I understood. This was his doing, his small attempt to include me in a meaningful way. Taking the microphone, I looked out at the sea of faces turned expectantly toward me. Rachel watched with barely concealed alarm from the head table. "For those who don't know me, I'm Emma Davis, Rachel's sister," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "I wasn't expected to speak tonight, so I hope you'll forgive me if my words aren't as polished as the previous toasts." A murmur of encouragement rippled through the crowd. Rachel and I grew up in a home where love was abundant, even when money wasn't, I continued, watching my sister's expression carefully. Our parents, Thomas and Marie Davis, gave us everything they could, not just materially, but in values, in support, in the kind of unwavering belief that makes you think anything is possible. I raised my glass toward our parents. They taught us that family means supporting each other through everything, celebrating successes and helping during challenges. That true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in how much you're willing to give of yourself to those you love. Rachel's smile had become fixed. She knew me well enough to sense that something was coming. As a financial advisor, I deal with numbers every day. But I've learned that the most important calculations aren't about dollars and cents. They're about the value of integrity, honesty, and doing right by the people who have given everything for you. I turned directly to Rachel now. My sister has always understood the power of presentation, of creating a beautiful image. Today is certainly a testament to that skill. The crowd chuckled appreciatively, unaware of the undercurrents. "But I want to toast to something deeper than appearances," I continued. "I want to toast to accountability, to transparency, to the kind of love that isn't just for show on special days, but shows up consistently in our actions and choices." I raised my glass higher. "So here's to Rachel and Ethan. May your marriage be built on honesty. May your future be secure. And may you always remember the true cost of the foundations you build upon." The guests applauded, though some looked slightly confused by the unusual toast. Rachel's face had drained of color, but she managed to raise her glass in acknowledgement. As I returned to my seat, Victoria Winters intercepted me, speaking loudly enough to be heard by those nearby. "That was beautifully said, ma'am. Your insights on financial integrity are particularly relevant. Ma'am, the formality and respect," in her address, so different from Rachel's dismissive treatment, sent a clear message to everyone who heard it. I smiled. "Thank you, Ms. Winters. Speaking of financial matters, I believe you mentioned some documents requiring immediate attention?" "Indeed," she replied, handing me a slim leather portfolio embossed with the Oak Ridge Community Bank logo. These require your signature as the designated financial protection agent for Thomas and Marie Davis. And there it was, the culmination of weeks of planning, the protection I'd arranged for my parents without their knowledge, the legal mechanism that would freeze the remaining wedding transfers and begin the process of investigating the financial exploitation. As I signed the documents with a steady hand, I was aware of Rachel watching from the head table, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror as she realized what was happening. The reception continued around us, the band playing, guests dancing, champagne flowing. But for Rachel and me, everything had changed. The bank president had called me ma'am at her wedding ceremony, acknowledging my authority in a way my sister never had, and setting in motion the consequences she never expected to face. The morning after the wedding, I woke to 17 missed calls and 32 text messages from Rachel. The final one, sent at 4:23 a.m., simply read, "How could you?" I set my phone face down on my nightstand and stared at the ceiling, the events of the previous night replaying in my mind. The toast. Victoria Winters approaching me. The documents I'd signed that effectively froze the remaining transfers from my parents' accounts and initiated an investigation into financial elder abuse. I hadn't planned to confront Rachel at her wedding. The original strategy had been more gradual. Gather evidence, build a case with the bank's elder protection unit, then address the situation privately after she returned from her honeymoon. But when Dad unexpectedly asked me to give a toast, the opportunity to begin the process publicly had been too perfect to ignore. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Jackson. "Are you watching the morning financial news?" he asked when I answered. "I just woke up." "Why?" "Ethan's family company is trending. Not in a good way." I scrambled for my laptop and pulled up the financial news. The headline made my stomach drop. "Miller Development faces federal investigation. Stock plummets 18% in pre-market trading." "This isn't related to what we did, is it?" I asked. "Jackson," panic rising in my throat. "No, this is completely separate. Apparently, the feds have been investigating some accounting irregularities for months. The timing is just unfortunate." Unfortunate was an understatement. I had just publicly initiated financial proceedings against Rachel at her wedding to Ethan, and now his family's company was under federal investigation. She would assume I'd orchestrated the whole thing. "I need to talk to my parents," I told Jackson, ending the call. When I arrived at their house 30 minutes later, Rachel's white Range Rover was already in the driveway, parked at an angle that suggested she'd arrived in a hurry. I steeled myself and walked in without knocking, a family habit from decades of Sunday dinners. The scene in the living room froze when I entered. Rachel in yesterday's makeup and a borrowed sweatsuit, her wedding updo half collapsed, my parents on the sofa looking shell-shocked, Ethan standing by the window, his face pale as he stared at his phone. "Well, here she is," Rachel said, her voice brittle. The architect of my humiliation. "Rachel," I started, but she cut me off. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The bank froze the payments for our honeymoon. The hotel in Paris just called to cancel our reservation because the credit card was declined, and now Ethan's family company is under investigation." "That has nothing to do with me," I said firmly, looking at my parents. "Mom, Dad, I can explain what happened with the bank." Dad looked confused, but Mom's expression was harder to read, a mixture of concern and something that might have been relief. "What's to explain?" Rachel's voice rose. "You publicly accused me of stealing from our parents." "Did you?" I countered, stepping further into the room. "Because I have documentation showing that over $120,000 of their retirement money went to accounts only you can access, through shell companies you created specifically for this purpose." The room went silent. Ethan turned from the window, his expression shifting from distracted worry to focused attention. "What are you talking about?" he asked, looking between Rachel and me. I opened my bag and pulled out a folder containing printouts of the financial trails Jackson and I had uncovered. Bloom Concepts, Celebration Solutions, Elite Event Management, all shell companies created in the last 4 months, all receiving substantial transfers from our parents' accounts, all redirecting significant portions to personal accounts under Rachel's control. I handed the folder to Ethan, not Rachel. A strategic choice. "These are wedding vendors," Rachel said quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. "No," I corrected her. "These are paper entities with no real business operations, no employees, and no legitimate services provided. The actual vendors were paid far less than what left Mom and Dad's accounts." Ethan flipped through the pages, his background in real estate development giving him enough financial literacy to understand what he was seeing. With each page, his expression darkened. "Rachel?" he finally asked, looking up at his bride of less than 24 hours. "What is this?" Rachel's composure cracked slightly. "It's not what it looks like. I was consolidating payments for efficiency. Wedding planning is complicated." "So complicated that you needed to route payments through 3 different LLCs?" I asked. "So complicated that the florist who received $45,000 from Mom and Dad's account actually billed $18,000 for the arrangements we saw yesterday?" Mom gasped. Dad slumped further into the sofa. "You should go," Rachel snapped at me. "This is between me and my husband and our parents." "Your parents who now have $12,183 to live on for the rest of their lives?" I countered. "Their house is paid off, thank goodness, but Dad's medication alone costs $100 a month. Their property taxes are $8,000 a year. How exactly were you planning to help them manage?" "We were going to help them," Rachel insisted, looking to Ethan for confirmation. "Once we were settled." Ethan's expression had turned unreadable. "I think I need some air," he said quietly, setting down the folder and walking out the front door without looking at any of us. Rachel stared after him, then turned on me with fury. "See what you've done? You've ruined everything." "No, Rachel. You did that when you took advantage of Mom and Dad's love for you." She turned to our parents, her expression morphing into one of wounded innocence. "You offered to help with the wedding. You wanted to give me my special day. Tell her, Mom." Mom's gaze dropped to her hands, twisted in her lap. "We did want you to have a beautiful wedding, honey, but we thought it would cost maybe $50,000. We had no idea it would be everything we had. And you never told us exactly how much was being transferred," Dad added, his voice stronger than I'd expected. "Each time, it was just another vendor payment, another deposit. We never saw the total until Emma showed us the statements." Rachel's strategy shifted visibly. "Okay, maybe I wasn't transparent enough about the costs. That's on me. But these accusations about shell companies and stealing? Emma's just jealous. She's always been jealous of me, of my life, of my success." It was an old tactic, one that had worked throughout our childhood, painting me as the jealous younger sister, the serious one who resented Rachel's beauty and charisma. I waited for my parents to fall into the familiar pattern of soothing Rachel's wounded feelings while dismissing mine. But something had changed. "Stop it, Rachel," Mom said, her voice quiet but firm. "This isn't about jealousy. This is about what you did with our money." Rachel blinked, seemingly as shocked by Mom's response as I was. "I've suspected something wasn't right for weeks," Mom continued. "The way you dodged questions about costs, the way you pressured us to make transfers immediately, without time to consider. But I kept telling myself you wouldn't take advantage of us like that." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "I wasn't taking advantage. I was building my brand, securing our future. This wedding was an investment, in connections, in opportunities." "In yourself," Dad corrected gently. "Not in us. Not in your relationship with Ethan, who clearly had no idea what you were doing." Rachel's tears spilled over, smearing her day-old mascara. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. Despite everything, she was still my sister. But then I thought of my parents, who would now spend their retirement years in financial anxiety instead of the comfort they'd worked decades to secure. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, keeping my voice level. "The bank has frozen the SI. Remaining transfers pending an investigation into financial elder abuse. That's standard procedure when there's evidence of exploitation. But there's an alternative path." All eyes turned to me. "You can return the money, Rachel. All of it. The funds that went to your personal accounts, the inflated vendor payments, everything. If you do that voluntarily, we can request that the bank halt the formal investigation." "I don't have it," Rachel said immediately. "It's spent." "The wedding costs nowhere near $340,000, I finished for her. "Even the most extravagant estimate puts it at around $150,000, based on the actual vendor contracts I've reviewed. The rest is recoverable." "And if I can't recover it?" she challenged. "Then the bank's investigation continues. The police become involved. Financial elder abuse is a criminal offense in Illinois, Rachel." Her face paled. "You would do that to me? Your own sister?" "I would do anything to protect Mom and Dad," I said simply, "including giving you the chance to make this right before it goes further." The front door opened and Ethan returned. His face was composed now, but his eyes were hard as he looked at Rachel. "We need to talk," he said to her, privately. As they moved toward the kitchen, I heard him say in a low voice, "Is this why you insisted on handling all the wedding financials yourself?" I turned back to my parents once Rachel and Ethan were out of earshot. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the investigation before I initiated it. I was trying to gather all the evidence first." Dad reached for my hand. "You did what you thought was necessary to protect us, just like you always have." "But at Rachel's wedding?" Mom asked, her voice pained. "Couldn't it have waited until after?" I sighed. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. The original plan was to address everything after they returned from their honeymoon. But when Dad asked me to give a toast, and Victoria approached me about the documents needing immediate signature, I trailed off. I made a judgment call. Maybe it was the wrong one." Mom nodded slowly. "Maybe. But I understand why you did it." She looked toward the kitchen where Rachel's voice was rising in what sounded like a defensive explanation to Ethan. "I just hope we can find a way through this as a family." The hope in her voice nearly broke me. My parents, always believing the best of their children, always seeking reconciliation even in the face of profound hurt. "We'll try," I promised, though I had serious doubts about Rachel's capacity for the kind of accountability this situation demanded. The next 3 days unfolded in a blur of financial analysis, legal consultations, and family tension. Ethan postponed their honeymoon indefinitely, citing the need to deal with both his family's company crisis and the revelations about Rachel's financial manipulations. They moved into Ethan's downtown condo instead of the luxury hotel where they'd planned to spend their first few nights as a married couple. Rachel initially denied everything, then tried to minimize her actions. It was just creative accounting, not theft. Then finally, when faced with the overwhelming evidence, admitted to diverting approximately $140,000 from our parents' accounts to her personal use. The admission came during a tense meeting at my apartment with Ethan, my parents, Victoria Winters, and a financial crimes specialist from the bank present. "I needed the money," she said, her voice small. "My influencer income dropped 30% last quarter. 2 major sponsors pulled out because my engagement metrics weren't meeting projections, but I couldn't tell anyone. Not you, not Ethan, not his family. Everyone thinks I'm successful. I had to maintain the image." "So you took your parents' retirement to keep up appearances?" Victoria asked, her professional demeanor barely concealing her disapproval. Rachel nodded miserably. I told myself I'd pay it back once my new sponsorships came through after the wedding. High-profile marriages boost influencer status. I had 3 major brands ready to sign once we were official. And now? Ethan asked, speaking for the first time during the meeting. Rachel couldn't meet his eyes. Now they're reconsidering, given the circumstances. The circumstances being that Miller wedding scandal was trending on social media, with financial bloggers picking up on both the Miller Company investigation and rumors of financial impropriety surrounding the wedding itself. Rachel's carefully curated image was crumbling in real time. We need to discuss restitution, the bank specialist said, redirecting the conversation. Ms. Davis, you've admitted to misappropriating $140,000. Our investigation suggests the figure is closer to $170,000 when we account for all the inflated vendor payments that benefited you directly or indirectly. Rachel looked to Ethan, who had maintained a stony silence throughout most of the meeting. I can't repay it immediately, she admitted. Most of what I took went to paying off past debts and padding my lifestyle to maintain appearances. I'll cover it, Ethan said suddenly. All eyes turned to him. I'll transfer the full amount to Thomas and Marie's account today. Consider it a loan to my wife, to be repaid on terms we'll determine privately. The relief on my parents' faces was palpable. The bank specialist nodded, making a note in her file. With full restitution, the Davises may choose not to pursue criminal charges, she said. However, the bank will maintain a financial protection order on the accounts for at least 6 months, requiring additional verification for any large transfers. That's reasonable, I agreed, looking at my parents for confirmation. They nodded. There's something else, Ethan added, his voice firm. I want a complete financial disclosure from Rachel. Every account, every debt, every source of income. No more secrets. Rachel looked stricken. Ethan, my finances are complicated because of my business. That wasn't a request, he cut her off. It's a condition of my covering this money. Full transparency starting today. As the meeting concluded and everyone except Rachel and me filed out of my apartment, I felt a weight lifting. My parents' retirement funds would be restored. The bank's protective measures would prevent future exploitation. The worst of the crisis had been averted. Rachel remained seated at my dining table, staring at her hands. You must be happy, she said when we were alone. You've exposed me as a fraud, humiliated me publicly, and forced Ethan to see me at my worst. I sat across from her. That wasn't my goal, Rachel. No? Then what was your goal exactly? To protect Mom and Dad, to make sure they don't spend their retirement in poverty because of choices you made. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. You could have handled it privately. You didn't have to create a spectacle at my wedding. You're right, I admitted. The timing was unfortunate. I should have waited until after the ceremony. Something flickered in her expression, surprise at my concession, perhaps. Why did you do it? I asked after a moment. Take their money, I mean. You must have known they couldn't afford to give you their entire retirement savings. Rachel was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its defensive edge. Do you remember when I got accepted to Parsons? How excited I was. I nodded. It had been one of the few times I'd seen my normally poised sister truly ecstatic. That was supposed to be my beginning, my chance to build something real. A design. Career. A legitimate business. She twisted the new wedding ring on her finger. But then we couldn't afford it, and I ended up at State studying marketing instead. And I was good at it, especially the self-promotion part. So I leaned into that, building this influencer persona. You've been successful at it, I pointed out. She laughed bitterly. It's smoke and mirrors, Emma. I'm successful at appearing successful. The reality? I'm $86,000 in debt, not counting what I took from mom and dad. My engagement numbers have been dropping for months. I'm one algorithm change away from irrelevance. And the wedding? Was supposed to fix everything. Marry into the Miller family, gain their connections, boost my profile with a fairy tale ceremony, leverage the publicity into bigger sponsorships. She sighed. And yes, take some financial pressure off. I didn't start out planning to take their whole retirement. It just escalated. Each transfer was so easy, and they never questioned anything. The sadness in her voice seemed genuine, but I'd learned not to take Rachel's performances at face value. That doesn't excuse what you did, I said. I know. She met my eyes directly. But it might help explain it. I was desperate, Emma. Drowning in debt, watching my career implode in slow motion, trying to maintain this perfect image for everyone. Ethan, his family, my followers, mom and dad. For the first time in our adult lives, I felt I was seeing the real Rachel. Not the golden child, not the charismatic influencer, but a frightened woman who'd built her life on appearances she could no longer sustain. What will you do now? I asked. She shrugged, a surprisingly inelegant gesture for someone who carefully choreographed every movement for social media. Try to save my marriage for starters. Ethan is... She hesitated. Not who I expected him to be in a crisis. Better or worse? Different. I thought he'd be furious, ready to annul the marriage. Instead, he's coldly practical. The financial disclosure, the repayment plan, it's like he's handling a troubled business acquisition, not a personal betrayal. I thought of Ethan's family's company, now under federal investigation. Maybe that's how he's been taught to handle crises. Rachel nodded slowly. Maybe. The question is whether our marriage can survive this level of disclosure. I never wanted him to see the real me. The real you isn't just what you did with mom and dad's money, I said, surprising myself with the attempt at comfort. That was a terrible choice, but it's not the sum total of who you are. She looked at me with genuine curiosity. When did you get so philosophical? Probably around the time I started turning my spare bedroom into an amateur financial crimes investigation unit. A startled laugh escaped her. God, we're a mess, aren't we? The influencer who's actually broke and the responsible financial advisor who goes vigilante. It wasn't really funny, none of this was, but I found myself smiling anyway. For a brief moment, we weren't adversaries or even older and younger sisters with our typical dynamics. We were just two women acknowledging the absurdity of the situation we found ourselves in. The moment passed quickly. Rachel stood, gathering her designer handbag. Authentic or counterfeit, I now wondered. Ethan's waiting downstairs. We have a meeting with his family's lawyers about the company situation. She hesitated at the door. For what it's worth, I am sorry about mom and dad. I never meant to leave them with nothing. Intentions matter, I acknowledged, but actions matter more. Make this right, Rachel. Not just the money, though that's essential, but the trust you've broken. She nodded, a gesture that might have been genuine or might have been another performance. With Rachel, it was always hard to tell where the act ended and the real person began. After she left, I called Jackson. How did it go? He asked. Better than expected. Ethan's covering the money. The bank is maintaining protective measures on my parents' accounts. No criminal charges as long as full restitution is made. That's good, Jackson said, though he sounded distracted. What's wrong? He hesitated. I've been looking deeper into the Miller development situation. It's concerning, Emma. The federal investigation involves potential money laundering through real estate projects. If Ethan is implicated, then Rachel could be seen as an accessory if she knew about it, I finished, my stomach sinking. And the money he's using to repay my parents. Could potentially be tainted, Jackson confirmed. I'm not saying it is, just that this might not be over. I ended the call and walked to my balcony, looking out at the lakeside skyline as afternoon faded toward evening. The sense of resolution I'd felt just minutes ago evaporated. If the money Ethan used to repay my parents came from questionable sources, we could be facing an even bigger problem than Rachel's deception. I'd been so focused on the immediate crisis, my parents' depleted retirement accounts, that I hadn't considered the broader implications of connecting our family's finances to the Millers just as their company faced federal scrutiny. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria Winters. Transfer from Ethan Miller complete. Funds now secured in your parents' protected account. Restitution officially satisfied. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt a new wave of apprehension. Had I solved one problem only to create a much larger one? The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Instead of heading to my office at Meridian Financial, I drove to the quiet coffee shop where Jackson and I had mapped out the initial investigation into Rachel's financial maneuvers. He was already there when I arrived, 2 laptops open on the SOG table in front of him, a half-empty coffee mug suggesting he'd been working for some time. Tell me everything you know about the Miller investigation, I said without preamble, setting down my bag and signaling the barista for coffee. Jackson glanced around to ensure we weren't overheard, then turned one of his laptops toward me. Miller Development specializes in mixed-use commercial projects, retail on the ground floor, offices or apartments above. They've completed 8 major developments in the Chicago area over the past decade. I know the basics, I said. What about the investigation? The feds are looking into 3 projects specifically. He pointed to the screen where he'd mapped out the information. All completed within the last 3 years, all showing significant cost overruns that were justified with vague line items like specialized materials and consultant fees. Classic money laundering indicators, I noted. Inflate costs, pay ghost vendors, circulate illicit funds through legitimate businesses. Jackson nodded. What's particularly interesting is the timing. The investigation became public the day after Rachel's wedding, but according to my sources, the feds have been building this case for months. The search warrants for Miller Development's offices were executed Saturday morning while everyone was celebrating at the reception. I sat back, processing this. So Ethan almost certainly knew this was coming. He might even have fast-tracked the wedding to take place before the investigation became public. It's possible, Jackson agreed. What we don't know is how much Rachel knew, or whether the money Ethan transferred to your parents yesterday is connected to any of this. The barista delivered my coffee and I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, trying to think clearly. I need to talk to Victoria again. The bank would have compliance procedures for large transfers, especially with a publicly known investigation in progress. Already reached out to her, Jackson said, sliding a notepad toward me. She can meet us at 11:30. I raised an eyebrow. Us? He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. I thought you might want backup. This is getting complicated. The fact that he'd anticipated my needs shouldn't have surprised me. Jackson had been 3 steps ahead throughout this entire situation, offering support without being asked. I found myself studying him with new interest. His meticulously pressed shirt, his carefully groomed appearance, the quiet competence that I'd always appreciated professionally, but never really considered in a personal context. Thank you, I said, meaning it, for all of this. You didn't have to get involved in my family drama. That's what friends do, he replied simply. Besides, it's refreshing to use my financial crime expertise for something meaningful instead of just protecting corporate assets. At 11:30, we met Victoria at a small conference room in the bank's downtown branch. Her expression was grave as she closed the door behind us. The transfer from Ethan Miller was flagged by our compliance department, she said without preamble. Given the public nature of the investigation into Miller Development, Any transaction over $10,000 from anyone connected to the company receives enhanced scrutiny. Has the money been frozen? I asked, my heart sinking. Not yet. We've completed the preliminary review and found no immediate red flags. The funds came from Ethan's personal account, which has maintained a consistent balance above $500,000 for the past year. The source appears to be his salary and bonuses from Miller Development, all properly documented. I exhaled in relief. So my parents' money is safe? Victoria hesitated. For now, but if the federal investigation implicates Ethan directly and determines that his compensation was derived from illicit activities, things could change. The bank would be obligated to cooperate with any asset freezes or forfeitures ordered by the court. Jackson leaned forward. What's the timeline on that potential scenario? Impossible to say, Victoria admitted. Federal investigations, especially complex financial ones, can take months or years. Or the issue could be resolved quickly if the Millers cooperate or if Ethan is cleared of involvement. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. So we're in limbo. Essentially, Victoria agreed. The good news is that your parents' money has been restored. The protective measures we've implemented will prevent any similar exploitation in the future. The question now is whether those funds might eventually be subject to scrutiny due to their source. What do you recommend? I asked. Victoria considered for a moment. Transparency and proactive communication. If your parents are contacted by federal investigators regarding the source of the recent deposit, they should be fully cooperative. In the meantime, it might be prudent to keep the funds in the protected account rather than making any significant new investments or purchases. After our meeting with Victoria, Jackson and I walked along the lakefront, the spring breeze carrying the scent of newly blooming flowers. Under different circumstances, it would have been a pleasant break from our usual office environment. What's your next move? Jackson asked as we paused to watch sailboats skimming across the water. I need to talk to Rachel again, I said. Find out what she knows about the Miller investigation and whether Ethan's involvement might affect our parents. He nodded. And personally, how are you holding up with all this? The question caught me off guard. In the whirlwind of the past weeks, I'd barely had time to consider my own emotional state. I started, then reconsidered. Actually, I don't know. Relieved that my parents' money has been restored, at least temporarily. Angry at Rachel for creating this situation in the first place. Worried about what might happen if the Miller investigation touches our family. That's a lot to carry, Jackson observed, especially alone. I'm not alone, I found myself saying. I have you. The words hung between us, carrying more weight than I'd intended. Jackson's expression softened, and for a moment I thought he might reach for my hand. Instead, he adjusted his glasses in a gesture I was beginning to recognize as a nervous habit. Yes, he said simply. You do. We continued walking, a comfortable silence falling between us. For the first time since discovering my parents' depleted accounts, I felt something other than anxiety and determination. A quiet awareness that in the midst of this family crisis, something unexpected was developing. I wasn't sure what to call it yet, but it felt like possibility. That evening, I drove to Ethan and Rachel's downtown condo. The doorman recognized me, perhaps from wedding photos, and allowed me up without calling ahead. I hesitated before knocking, uncertain what reception awaited me. Rachel opened the door, her appearance startlingly different from her usual polished self. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face bare of makeup, her designer clothes replaced by yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt. For a moment, she looked like the sister I remembered from childhood, before the influence of social media, before her carefully constructed persona. Emma, she said, surprise evident in her voice. What are you doing here? We need to talk, I said, about Ethan's family company and how it might affect the money he transferred to Mom and Dad. Her expression shifted from surprise to resignation. "You'd better come in." The condo was immaculate, all sleek surfaces and minimalist decor, though stacks of papers on the dining table suggested it had become a makeshift office. Rachel led me to the living room where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the city. "Ethan's not here," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "He's meeting with his family's attorneys again." "That's becoming a pattern," I observed. Rachel sank onto the white leather sofa, tucking her feet under her in a casual pose I couldn't remember seeing her adopt in years. "It's all he does lately. That and pore over financial documents. I barely recognize my own husband. Under different circumstances, I might have felt sympathy for her. But given recent events, my priority had to remain my parents." "What do you know about the investigation into Miller Development?" I asked directly. "Not much," she admitted. "Ethan doesn't discuss it with me. Especially now, after—" She trailed off. "After he discovered you've been hiding financial issues and diverting money?" I supplied. She winced. "Yes, but I've gathered some information. The feds are looking into 3 of their recent development projects. Something about cost irregularities and potential money laundering." "And Ethan's involvement?" Rachel twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd noticed developing since our confrontation. "He claims he had no knowledge of any irregularities, that he was focused on the architectural and design aspects, not the financial side." "Do you believe him?" She met my eyes directly. "I don't know what to believe anymore. A week ago, I would have said Ethan was incapable of anything unethical. But a week ago, I was also lying to him about my own finances, so—" She shrugged helplessly. "The money he transferred to Mom and Dad," I pressed. "Where did it come from?" "His personal savings, as far as I know. Ethan has always kept separate accounts, something I initially attributed to his family's wealth and traditional values. Now I wonder if there were other reasons." I leaned forward, needing her to understand the seriousness of the situation. "Rachel, if that money came from illegal activities and Ethan knew it, accepting it could make Mom and Dad accessories to money laundering." Her face paled. "I didn't think of that." "No, you were too busy thinking about yourself as usual." The words slipped out before I could stop them, harsh and accusatory. Rachel didn't fire back with her typical defensiveness. Instead, she looked away, her profile silhouetted against the city lights beyond the window. "You're right," she said quietly. "I've been selfish, reckless. I took advantage of Mom and Dad's generosity. I lied to everyone, including myself." She turned back to me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "But I never meant to put them in legal jeopardy. You have to believe that." The sincerity in her voice was compelling. Despite everything, I found myself wanting to believe her. This version of Rachel that seemed stripped of pretense. "I need your help then," I said. "I need you to find out exactly where that money came from and whether it could be problematic. Not for your sake, but for Mom and Dad's." She nodded. "I'll try. Though Ethan isn't exactly forthcoming with me these days." "Try harder," I insisted. "Our parents have already been victims once. I won't let them become collateral damage in someone else's legal problems." Rachel studied me for a moment. "You've changed, Emma. You're formidable now." I thought about the past weeks, the investigation I'd conducted, the strategies I'd developed, the confrontations I'd initiated. I've always been formidable. You just never noticed. As I stood to leave, Rachel asked, "What will you do if the money is tainted?" "Whatever's necessary to protect Mom and Dad," I answered without hesitation, "even if that means returning it and finding another way to secure their retirement." Walking back to my car in the gathering dusk, I realized the truth of my words. I would do whatever was necessary, not just to address the immediate crisis, but to ensure my parents' long-term security. The solution might require creativity, sacrifice, even risk, but I wouldn't stop until they were safe. For the first time, I understood something fundamental about both Rachel and myself. We were our parents' daughters in different ways. Her charisma and my determination, her flair for presentation and my attention to detail, these weren't just personality traits but tools we'd developed, shaped by the same loving but financially insecure household. The difference was how we chose to use those tools. Rachel had turned hers toward building an image that could bring her the security and recognition she craved. I had turned mine toward creating actual security, first for myself and now for our parents. As I drove home through the darkening city, my phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. Found something interesting in the Miller financials. Call when you can. The investigation wasn't over. It was evolving, growing more complex. But for the first time since discovering my parents' empty accounts, I felt equipped for whatever came next. Not because I had all the answers, but because I had found my strength, the quiet, determined force that had always been there, waiting for the moment it would be needed most. Jackson's discovery proved more consequential than I'd anticipated. We met at his apartment the following evening, where he'd converted his dining room into an impromptu investigation center. Multiple monitors displayed financial records, corporate filings, and news articles about Miller development. I've been tracking money flows through the Miller Company's projects, he explained, handing me a mug of tea. Something caught my attention in their Riverside Plaza development. He pulled up a spreadsheet showing contractor payments for the commercial property Ethan's family had developed 3 years earlier. See this vendor? Sterling Design Consultants? Jackson pointed to a series of payments totaling over $2 million. They received substantial fees for interior design concepts and implementation. That seems high, but not necessarily suspicious for a luxury development, I noted. True, Jackson agreed. Except for 2 things. First, Sterling Design Consultants was incorporated just 2 weeks before receiving their first payment from Miller Development. And second, he clicked to another document. The company's registered agent is listed as R. Miller. I stared at the screen. R. Miller, as in Rachel Miller? That's not possible. She wasn't even engaged to Ethan 3 years ago. Not Rachel, Jackson clarified. Robert, Ethan's father. So the company had paid millions to a firm he himself controlled? That's textbook self-dealing. Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. Jackson pulled up another document. Sterling Design Consultants subcontracted work to several other entities, including this one, Visionary Concepts LLC, registered to Rachel Davis, before she became Rachel Miller. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Rachel was involved in Ethan's family business 3 years ago. She told me they only met 18 months ago at a charity gala. According to these records, Visionary Concepts received $420,000 from Sterling over a 6-month period. The company was dissolved shortly after the payments stopped. I sank into a chair, trying to process this information. So Rachel had a business relationship with Ethan's family years before they supposedly met. She received substantial payments that appear to be part of an arrangement the feds are now investigating. And she never disclosed any of this. That's my reading of the situation, Jackson confirmed. The question is whether these payments were for legitimate design work. Your sister did study design initially, right? Or whether they were part of the financial irregularities under investigation. My mind was racing. If Rachel received money that was part of a laundering scheme, even unknowingly, she could be legally exposed. And if she and Ethan have known each other for years through this business connection rather than meeting randomly at a gala, then their entire relationship narrative might be constructed, Jackson finished, potentially to serve some purpose related to the financial arrangements between their families. The implications were staggering, not just for my parents' money, but for everything I thought I knew about my sister's life. "I need to confront her," I said, reaching for my phone. Jackson placed his hand gently on my arm. "Wait. We should be strategic here. If Rachel has been deliberately hiding her connection to the Miller family, confronting her directly might cause her to destroy evidence or alert others. What do you suggest? We take this information to Victoria first. The bank needs to know about this potential connection, especially since Ethan's money is now in your parents' account. Then we approach Rachel carefully, perhaps with Victoria present as a neutral third party." I nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his approach. "You're right. This isn't just about family dynamics anymore. There could be legal implications for everyone involved." As I studied the evidence Jackson had gathered, a thought occurred to me. "How did you find this connection? These records aren't exactly public information." A slight flush colored Jackson's cheeks. "I have some contacts in financial forensics from my previous position. They owed me a favor." "Is this legal?" I asked, suddenly concerned. "The information was obtained through legitimate channels," he assured me. "Financial investigators have access to corporate registries and payment records that aren't easily available to the general public, but they're not confidential in a legal sense." I wasn't entirely convinced, but the urgency of the situation outweighed my concerns about Jackson's methods. If Rachel had been knowingly involved in financial impropriety through Ethan's family, she might have deliberately targeted our parents' money as part of a larger scheme. We arranged to meet Victoria the next morning at Oak Ridge Community Bank. The early hour meant we could speak privately before regular banking hours, reducing the chance of being seen by other clients. Victoria listened attentively as Jackson presented his findings, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. "This considerably complicates matters," she said when he finished. "If the federal investigation determines that funds from Miller Development were improperly distributed through these shell companies, any assets derived from those funds could potentially be subject to seizure. Including the money now in my parents' account," I confirmed. "Precisely. And potentially other assets your sister may have acquired through her relationship with the Millers." "What's our next step?" I asked. Victoria thought for a moment. "From the bank's perspective, we need to file a supplementary suspicious activity report regarding the transfer from Ethan Miller, noting this potential connection to the ongoing federal investigation. That's our legal obligation." "And my parents' money?" "For now, it remains in their protected account. But I must caution you, if federal authorities issue a seizure order, the bank will have no choice but to comply." Jackson leaned forward. "What about preemptively returning the money? If Emma's parents voluntarily surrender the funds as potentially tainted, wouldn't that protect them from accusations of knowingly accepting illicit money?" Victoria nodded slowly. "That approach has merit. It would demonstrate good faith and potentially shield them from any accusations of complicity. However, it would also leave them without the retirement funds they need." The weight of the situation settled heavily on my shoulders. Once again, my parents' financial security hung in the balance, not because of Rachel's extravagant wedding this time, but because of potential criminal activity involving her and her new husband's family. "We need more information before making that decision," I said finally. "I want to speak with Rachel directly about this connection to the Millers. See if there's an innocent explanation." "Proceed with caution," Victoria advised. "If your suspicions are correct, confronting her could prompt actions that might complicate the legal situation further." As we left the bank, Jackson suggested we take a break before confronting Rachel. "You've barely slept in days," he pointed out. "You need to clear your head before this conversation." He was right. The constant stress and unfolding revelations had left me exhausted. We found a quiet cafe near the lakefront, ordered breakfast, and deliberately avoided discussing the Miller investigation for an hour. Instead, Jackson told me about his background: Growing up in San Francisco, studying economics at MIT, working, briefly for the Treasury Department before moving to the private sector, I shared stories about my childhood with Rachel, the dynamic between us growing up, and my parents' dedication to giving us opportunities despite their modest means. By the time we finished our meal, I felt more centered than I had in weeks. The crisis hadn't changed, but stepping away from it briefly had restored my perspective. "Thank you," I told Jackson as we walked along the lake afterward. "For everything. The investigation, the support, even forcing me to take a break." He smiled, the morning sunlight catching in his dark eyes. "That's what partners do." "Partners?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "In crime fighting," he clarified quickly, then laughed at himself. That sounded less corny in my head. I found myself laughing too, the tension of the morning momentarily broken. The sound surprised me. I couldn't remember the last time I'd genuinely laughed since discovering my parents' empty accounts. The moment of lightness was short-lived. My phone rang, displaying my mother's number. "Emma, are you busy?" She sounded anxious. "Rachel is here. She's very upset and saying something about the money Ethan gave us being complicated. Your father and I don't understand what's happening." My heart sank. Somehow Rachel had learned about our investigation. "I'll be right there, Mom. Don't make any decisions or sign anything until I arrive." I turned to Jackson. "Rachel's at my parents' house talking about the money. She must have found out what we discovered." "I'll come with you," he said immediately. "No, this needs to be family first, but stay close to your phone. I may need your expertise." 30 minutes later, I was walking into my parents' living room, where a scene of tension was unfolding. Rachel paced back and forth while my parents sat on the sofa, looking bewildered and anxious. "Emma," Mom said with evident relief, "Rachel says there might be problems with the money Ethan gave us." Rachel stopped pacing and stared at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her usual poise absent. "You've been investigating me again," she said, flatly. "Going through old business records, talking to the bank about my past." I kept my voice calm. "How did you find out?" "Ethan got a call from their corporate attorney. The bank filed some kind of report connecting his transfer to my old design business. He's furious, convinced I told you about visionary concepts." "But you didn't," I noted. "Because you've been lying about how you met Ethan and your entire relationship with his family." Dad stood up, confusion written across his face. "What's going on? What design business?" I looked between my parents, deciding how much to reveal. They deserved the truth, but I needed to be careful about how I presented it. "Rachel had a business connection to Ethan's family years before she claims they met," I explained. "Her company received substantial payments that may be linked to the financial practices now under federal investigation." Mom gasped. "Rachel, is this true?" Rachel sank into an armchair, the fight suddenly leaving her. "It's not what it sounds like. I did legitimate design work for them." "Through a shell company set up by Ethan's father?" I challenged. "Receiving payments that were grossly inflated for the services provided?" "I didn't know the financial structure," she insisted. "I was hired to design interiors for the Riverside Plaza project. I did the work, I got paid. Yes, the money was good, but I had no reason to think it was improper." "And meeting Ethan by chance at a charity gala 18 months ago? Was that part of the arrangement too?" A flush spread across Rachel's cheeks. "We had met briefly during the project, but the relationship didn't develop until later. The gala story is simpler, more romantic. It's what people expect." "People expect the truth from family," Dad said quietly, disappointment evident in his voice. Rachel looked at our father, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm sorry. For everything. The wedding money, the lies about how Ethan and I met. But I never, ever intended to involve you in anything illegal." "Yet here we are," I said, "with potentially tainted money in your account, Dad. Money that federal investigators might determine came from illegal activities." Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Could we go to jail? No, I assured her quickly. You had no knowledge of any impropriety, but the money could be seized if it's determined to be connected to illegal activities. Then we'll give it back, Dad said firmly. I won't keep money that isn't clean no matter how much we need it. Rachel buried her face in her hands. This is all falling apart. Ethan is talking about separation. His family blames me for drawing attention to the company's finances. And now I've put you both at risk. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of sympathy for my sister. She'd made terrible choices, but she was clearly suffering the consequences. We need to be strategic here, I said, drawing on Jackson's approach. First, we need to understand exactly what Rachel knew about the payments to her company and when. Then we need to decide whether to preemptively return Ethan's money or wait for the investigation to unfold. Return it, Rachel said, looking up. I know we need that money for retirement, but keeping it could make things worse for everyone. And what would Mom and Dad live on? I challenged. Rachel met my eyes directly. I have some savings left. Not much after paying debts, but enough to help in the short term. And I'll get a real job. Not influencer work, but actual design or marketing. I'll contribute monthly to rebuild what I took. The offer seemed sincere, but I'd learned to be cautious about Rachel's promises. What about your lifestyle? Your image? She laughed bitterly. That's over, Emma. My follower count has dropped by 30% since the wedding scandal broke. 2 major sponsors have publicly severed ties with me. The carefully constructed image of Rachel Davis, influencer extraordinaire, is crumbling as we speak. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. Federal agents just entered Miller Development offices with new warrants. Things are escalating. Call when you can. I showed the message to my family. We need to act quickly. If the investigation is intensifying, the money in your account could be frozen at any moment. Then let's return it now, Dad said, standing up with determination. I want no part of this mess. I agree, Mom added. We managed before this. Money, we'll manage again. I looked at Rachel, who nodded in agreement. It's the right thing to do. Within the hour, we were at Oak Ridge Community Bank, meeting with Victoria in her private office. I explained our decision to preemptively return the funds to Ethan's account, citing concerns about the source of the money given the ongoing investigation. Victoria processed the transaction efficiently, providing documentation of the return and noting the reason in the bank's records. This demonstration of good faith will be noted if questions arise later, she assured my parents. As we were preparing to leave, Victoria asked to speak with me privately. My parents and Rachel waited in the lobby while I returned to her office. There's something you should know, Victoria said once we were alone. Your proactive approach in this matter has been noticed. I received a call this morning from a colleague at Huntington Bank. They're looking for a new financial advisor with experience in wealth protection, particularly for vulnerable clients. I blinked in surprise. Are you recommending me for a job? She smiled. Your handling of this situation has demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and ethical backbone they're seeking. It would be a significant step up from your current position. More responsibility, better compensation. If you're interested, I'd be happy to make a formal introduction. The offer caught me completely off guard. In the midst of crisis management, I hadn't considered how my actions might be viewed professionally. I would appreciate that. Thank you. Good. I'll set up a meeting for next week. And Emma, she added as I turned to leave, your parents are fortunate to have you looking out for them. The compliment warmed me, a bright spot in what had otherwise been a challenging day. When I rejoined my family in the lobby, Rachel gave me a questioning look. What was that about? She asked as we exited the bank. A potential job opportunity. Actually, something with more responsibility. Of course, she said. with a hint of her old competitiveness. Even in the middle of a crisis, you managed to advance your career. I bristled at the tone, ready to fire back defensively. But the look in Rachel's eyes wasn't jealousy. It was something closer to admiration. I mean it as a compliment, she clarified, perhaps sensing my reaction. You've handled this entire situation like a professional. I've been nothing but chaos and poor decisions. We reached my parents' car, where Dad was helping Mom with her seatbelt. The simple, caring gesture highlighted everything that was at stake in this situation. Not just money, but the dignity and security of two people who had given everything for their children. "What now?" Rachel asked quietly. "For Mom and Dad, they can't live on Social Security alone." "I've been working on contingency plans," I admitted. "Options that don't depend on Ethan's money. Such as? Dad's pension is modest but stable. If they downsize from the house to a smaller condo, they could free up equity to create an income stream. And I can contribute monthly toward their expenses." Rachel nodded slowly. "I want to help too. For real this time, not with empty promises." I studied my sister, trying to gauge her sincerity. The past weeks had revealed so many layers of deception that trust didn't come easily anymore. Yet something in her expression seemed different, a humility that I'd never associated with Rachel before. "Actions, not words," I said finally. "They need consistent support, not grand gestures." "I understand that now," she replied, "more clearly than you might think." We rejoined our parents, and I drove them home, discussing practical next steps, now that their retirement account was once again depleted. Rather than despair, they showed remarkable resilience, particularly Mom, who immediately began listing items they could sell to build a small emergency fund. "Your grandmother's silver," she mused. "I never use it anyway. And those collector plates your father accumulated." "Not the baseball commemoratives," Dad protested weakly, but his heart wasn't in it. We all recognized the necessity of sacrifices now. After settling my parents at home, I drove Rachel back to her condo. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken questions and lingering tension. "Ethan won't be there," she said abruptly as we neared downtown. "He's staying at the company apartment until we reassess our situation," as he puts it. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it despite everything. "This can't be easy." Rachel stared out the window at the passing city. "You know what the worst part is? I actually love him. Despite the complicated way we met, despite the business entanglements, I genuinely fell in love with Ethan. And I think he loved me too, before all this exploded." Her vulnerability in that moment was striking. For years, Rachel had presented herself as the sister who had everything: looks, charm, a glamorous career, and now a wealthy husband. Seeing her stripped of those external validations revealed the person underneath, complicated, flawed, but undeniably human. "What will you do if the marriage doesn't survive this?" I asked gently. She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice was steady. "Start over. Get a real job using my actual skills, not just my appearance. Find a place I can afford on my own. Learn to live without an audience for every moment of my life." "That sounds healthy," I observed. "It sounds terrifying," she corrected with a sad smile. "But necessary. I've been living in a house of cards, Emma. The perfect image, the curated life, the aspirational relationship. None of it was solid. This collapse was probably inevitable." We pulled up outside her building, but Rachel made no move to get out of the car. Instead, she turned to face me directly. "I need to tell you something," she said, her expression serious. "About the investigation into Miller Development." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What about it?" "Ethan talked in his sleep the night after the wedding. He mentioned something about his father and offshore accounts. I didn't think much of it at the time, I was dealing with the fallout from your toast and the bank's actions. But now, with everything we know, you think the Millers might have been moving money overseas? I finished for her. She nodded. And there's more. Last week, before you discovered the connection between my old design firm and their company, Ethan asked me to sign some backdated documents. He said it was standard paperwork that had been overlooked during the wedding preparations. I signed without reading everything carefully. Alarm bells rang in my mind. Rachel, that could be serious. If you signed documents that create a false paper trail for the company. I know, she interrupted. I realized it might be problematic after everything came to light. That's why I contacted a lawyer yesterday. Someone independent from the Millers' legal team. This was a surprising development. Rachel taking initiative to protect herself legally, separate from Ethan. What did the lawyer say? That I should gather any communications or documents related to my work for Sterling Design Consultants and Visionary Concepts. That I should avoid discussing the case with Ethan or his family, and that I should consider cooperating with federal investigators if approached. The implications were significant. If Rachel had been unwittingly involved in the Millers' financial schemes, cooperating with investigators could help her avoid serious legal consequences, but it would almost certainly end her marriage and potentially implicate her new husband and his family. Have you been approached by investigators yet? I asked. No, but my lawyer thinks it's only a matter of time, especially now that the bank has flagged the connection between my old company and the Millers. I absorbed this information, trying to think several steps ahead. What do you need from me? The question seemed to surprise her. Perhaps she'd expected judgment or criticism rather than an offer of help. Honestly, support. I'm facing the collapse of my marriage, possible legal jeopardy, and the end of my influencer career all at once. I feel untethered. The word choice was revealing. Rachel had always been the sister who seemed perfectly anchored in her confidence and social presence. Now she was adrift, searching for solid ground. You have it, I said simply. Support. Despite everything. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. That means more than you know. As she finally moved to exit the car, I found myself asking one last question. The wedding, Rachel. Was it all just for show? Part of some plan connected to the Millers' business? She paused, half out of the vehicle. The scale of it was for show. The extravagance, the social media spectacle. That served multiple purposes, including boosting my profile and cementing the Millers' image as Chicago royalty. But wanting to marry Ethan? Her voice softened. That part was real. After dropping Rachel off, I drove directly to Jackson's apartment. He buzzed me up immediately, greeting me at the door with evident concern. I've been trying to reach you, he said, ushering me inside. The situation with Miller Development is developing rapidly. His dining room investigation center had expanded, now featuring printouts of news articles taped to the wall alongside the financial documents. Federal agents executed search warrants at 3 Miller properties today, he explained, pointing to a Chicago Tribune article. Their main offices, Robert Miller's home, and a storage facility registered to the company. The investigation appears to be accelerating. Rachel thinks it involves offshore accounts, I said, summarizing my conversation with my sister, and she's consulted an independent lawyer about potentially cooperating with investigators. Jackson's eyebrows rose. That's significant. If she has insider knowledge about the Millers' financial practices, even secondhand through Ethan, she could be a valuable witness. Or target, I pointed out. She admitted to signing backdated documents at Ethan's request just last week. Definitely concerning, Jackson agreed. But her proactive approach in seeking independent legal counsel and returning the money to separate your parents from the situation demonstrates good faith. That counts for a lot in these investigations. I sank onto his sofa, suddenly exhausted by the day's developments. We returned the money, but that leaves my parents with essentially no retirement savings. Again. Jackson sat beside me, close, enough that I could smell his subtle cologne. You mentioned contingency plans to Rachel. What are you thinking? I outlined the options I'd been considering. Having my parents downsize to free up home equity, combining Dad's pension with Social Security, supplementing their income with regular contributions from Rachel and me. It could work, I concluded, but it would be tight. They'd have almost no buffer for emergencies or unexpected expenses. Jackson was quiet for a moment, seemingly deep in thought. What if there was another option? One that provided more security without depending on the Millers' money? I'm open to suggestions, I said. Your background is in financial advising. Mine is in financial fraud prevention and wealth protection. Together we have expertise that's valuable, particularly in this current climate where financial exploitation of seniors is a growing concern. I frowned, not following his train of thought. What are you suggesting? A partnership, he said, his eyes brightening with enthusiasm. A specialized advisory firm focused on wealth protection for vulnerable populations, seniors, recent widows, people with cognitive impairments. Victoria already mentioned that Huntington Bank is interested in your approach to these issues. What if, instead of taking a position there, you proposed a contracted service relationship? The bank refers clients to our firm for specialized protection, services, and we build a business around preventing exactly the kind of exploitation your parents experienced. The idea was unexpected, but immediately compelling. I'd been so focused on crisis management that I hadn't considered how this experience might translate into a new professional direction. That's actually brilliant, I admitted. But starting. A business requires capital, which is exactly what we're lacking right now. Not necessarily, Jackson countered. Advisory firms have relatively low startup costs, primarily office space and professional licensing fees. We already have the expertise and potential referral relationships through Victoria. We could start small, working with a limited client base while building our reputation. As he outlined the potential structure, emphasizing the growing market for financial protection services, I found myself becoming genuinely excited for the first time in weeks. This wasn't just a solution to my parents' immediate financial crisis. It was a way to channel our experience into preventing similar situations for others. We could help a lot of people, I said, the possibilities expanding in my mind. Not just wealthy clients, but middle-class retirees like my parents who are often overlooked by traditional financial services. Exactly, Jackson agreed. And if we're successful, we could generate enough income to help secure your parents' retirement within a year or two. The energy between us shifted as we discussed the potential business, our previous exhaustion giving way to shared excitement. Jackson pulled out his laptop and started drafting a preliminary business plan, while I made notes about potential client services and fee structures. Hours passed as we refined the concept, identifying regulatory requirements and running preliminary financial projections. It was nearly midnight when we finally paused, surrounded by notes and empty coffee mugs. This could really work, I said, reviewing our draft business plan. It addresses my parents' financial needs while creating something meaningful from this whole mess. Sometimes the best innovations come from necessity, Jackson observed. You needed to protect your parents, and in doing so, you've developed skills and insights that could help countless others. In the quiet of his apartment, with the city lights twinkling beyond the windows, I felt something I hadn't experienced since discovering my parents' empty accounts: hope. Not just for resolving the immediate crisis, but for creating something positive from the experience. Jackson seemed to sense my shift in mood. We should celebrate this breakthrough, he suggested. Even small victories deserve recognition. He disappeared into the kitchen, returning with 2 glasses and a bottle of wine. It's nothing fancy, he apologized. but it seems appropriate for launching a new venture, even if it's just conceptual, at this point. We toasted to our embryonic business plan, the simple gesture feeling significant despite the circumstances. As we sipped the wine, I found myself studying Jackson with new appreciation. His intelligence and ethical approach had been evident from our first professional interactions, but these past weeks had revealed deeper qualities: loyalty, resourcefulness, vision. "Thank you," I said, meaning far more than just the wine. "For everything. I couldn't have navigated any of this without you." Something shifted in his expression. A softening, a moment of vulnerability. "You would have figured it out," he said quietly. "You're remarkably capable, Emma. I just provided some technical expertise along the way." "It was more than that," I insisted. "You believed in me when I was doubting myself. You saw possibilities when I was focused on problems." The space between us seemed to contract, the late hour and shared mission creating an intimacy neither of us had acknowledged before. For a moment, I thought he might lean forward, closing the distance between us. Instead, he set down his glass carefully. "It's late," he said, his voice slightly rough. "We should probably continue this tomorrow when we're fresh." The moment passed, but something had changed between us. A recognition of possibilities beyond our professional collaboration. As I gathered my things to leave, I felt a curious mixture of disappointment and anticipation. Whatever was developing between Jackson and me would have to wait until the more pressing matters of my family's financial security and Rachel's legal situation were resolved. But for the first time, I could envision a future beyond the crisis. One that might include not just professional fulfillment through our new venture, but personal happiness as well. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Lakeside, my phone chimed with a text from Rachel. "Meeting with lawyer tomorrow. He thinks I have options. Thank you for standing by me despite everything." The simple message confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Amid the financial chaos and legal complications, something valuable was emerging. A more honest relationship with my sister, based not on competition or appearance but on mutual support during genuinely difficult times. The money was gone, returned to Ethan's account where it might soon be frozen by federal investigators. My parents faced an uncertain financial future. Rachel's marriage and career hung in the balance, but somehow, improbably, we were finding our way through the mess together, making plans, taking responsibility, supporting each other with a genuineness that had been missing from our family dynamics for years. It wasn't the resolution I had initially sought when discovering my parents' depleted accounts, but it might ultimately prove more meaningful. Not just the recovery of funds, but the reconstruction of relationships and the creation of new possibilities from the wreckage of old patterns. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, meetings with lawyers, discussions with my parents about downsizing options, further development of the business plan with Jackson. But for the first time in weeks, I felt equipped to face these challenges. Not alone, but supported by the unexpected allies this crisis had revealed. 3 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. The federal investigation into Miller Development expanded dramatically, with Robert Miller and 2 company executives indicted on charges of money laundering, tax evasion, and wire fraud. Ethan, while not indicted, resigned from the company and became a cooperating witness, a development that shocked Chicago's business community. Rachel's cooperation with investigators proved crucial. After providing documents and testimony about the backdated paperwork and financial irregularities she had witnessed, she received immunity from prosecution. Her marriage, however, couldn't survive the strain. Divorce proceedings began quietly, with both parties seeking privacy after months of public scrutiny. As for my parents, they faced their new financial reality with remarkable grace. The 4-bedroom home where Rachel and I had grown up went on the market, selling quickly to a young family. Mom cried as she packed up 30 years of memories, but found renewed purpose in helping my father downsize to a modest 2-bedroom condo near the lake. "It's smaller, but the view is better," she observed on moving day, watching sailboats drift across the water from their new balcony. "Sometimes less really is more." The proceeds from the house sale, combined with Dad's pension, provided enough security for their basic needs. It wasn't the comfortable retirement they had planned, but it was sustainable, especially with the monthly contributions Rachel and I had both committed to providing. True to her word, Rachel had abandoned her influencer persona and found a position at a small design firm specializing in commercial interiors. The salary was a fraction of what she had once earned from sponsorships, but it offered something her previous career hadn't: stability and authenticity. She moved from the luxury downtown condo to a 1-bedroom apartment in a less fashionable neighborhood, documenting her downsizing journey in a final social media post before stepping away from public life. The most significant development, however, came from the business plan Jackson and I had conceived during the crisis. What began as a late-night concept had evolved into Davis Chen Financial Protection Services, a specialized advisory firm focused on preventing financial exploitation of vulnerable populations. Victoria's introduction to Huntington Bank had proved invaluable, resulting in a formal referral partnership that provided our first clients. Word spread quickly in banking circles about our niche expertise, and by our 3rd month of operation, we had engaged with 27 clients, mostly seniors with substantial assets but limited financial literacy. Our office, a modest space in a historic building near Lakeside's business district, hummed with activity as we expanded to include a paralegal specializing in elder law and a former fraud investigator who helped track suspicious financial patterns. "We've received another referral from Northwestern Memorial's Geriatric Social Work Department," Jackson announced, entering my office with a fresh coffee in each hand. "A widower whose adult children are concerned about a financial advisor who's been pushing inappropriate investments." I accepted the coffee gratefully. "Our 4th hospital referral this month. The outreach to medical professionals is paying off, as is your presentation to the Lakeside Rotary Club. 3 of our newest clients mentioned your talk about financial vulnerability following major life transitions." The business was growing faster than we had projected, validating our belief that traditional financial services were failing to address the specific needs of at-risk populations. More importantly, the work felt meaningful, a direct response to the exploitation my own parents had experienced. Jackson settled into the chair across from my desk, loosening his tie slightly. "Have you reviewed the quarterly projections?" I nodded, pulling up the spreadsheet on my monitor. "If growth continues at this rate, we'll be able to increase our contributions to my parents' fund by January. And hire that marketing specialist we've been discussing," he added, "though I still think Rachel would be perfect for the role. Her design background combined with her personal experience with financial complications makes her uniquely qualified to communicate our services." The suggestion didn't surprise me. Jackson had mentioned the possibility before, recognizing Rachel's potential value to our growing firm despite her complicated history. "She's still finding her footing at the design studio," I said, "but I'll mention it when the time is right. She might appreciate the opportunity to use her experience." Constructively, Jackson's smile held a warmth that had become increasingly familiar over the past months. Our professional partnership had gradually evolved into something more personal, though we'd been careful to keep boundaries clear during the critical launch phase of the business. "Speaking of family," he said, checking his watch, "aren't you meeting your parents and Rachel for dinner tonight?" "Yes, at Castellanos. It's their 40th anniversary." "A milestone worth celebrating," Jackson observed, even amidst all the changes. The changes had indeed been profound, not just financial and logistical, but emotional as well. The family dynamics had shifted in ways I never could have anticipated when I first discovered my parents' depleted accounts. The crisis had stripped away pretenses, forcing honesty where there had once been competition and surface-level pleasantries. That evening, as I entered Castellanos, a modest Italian restaurant my parents had frequented throughout their marriage, I was struck by the scene before me. Dad helped Mom with her chair, his hand lingering affectionately on her shoulder. Rachel arrived moments after me, carrying a small wrapped gift and wearing a simple dress rather than the designer labels she once favored. "You made it," Mom said, her face lighting up as she spotted us both. My girls, together. We settled at the table, ordering wine and appetizers as Dad regaled us with stories from their early married years, many of which we'd heard before but enjoyed nonetheless. The easy laughter and genuine affection around the table felt like a precious gift after months of tension and uncertainty. During a lull in the conversation, Rachel reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope, sliding it across the table. To our parents. "It's not much," she said, a slight nervous tremor in her voice, "but it's something I wanted you to have." Mom opened the envelope and gasped softly. Inside was a check, not for a large amount, but significant given Rachel's new financial circumstances. "It's the first quarterly interest payment from my settlement," Rachel explained. Ethan had agreed to a modest financial settlement in their divorce, acknowledging his role in involving her with his family's business dealings. "I'm putting most of the principal into secure investments, but the interest, that's for you, every quarter, for as long as it generates returns." Dad's eyes glistened as he reached for Rachel's hand. "You don't need to do this, honey." "I do," she insisted. "It's not about obligation. It's about showing you, with actions not just words, that I understand what matters now." The moment was charged with emotion, not just Rachel's gesture, but the journey it represented. From taking their retirement, savings to establishing a sustainable way to contribute to their security, she had come full circle. I realized it was time to share my own news. "I have something to contribute as well," I said, reaching for my own bag. "Jackson and I have been reviewing the performance of Davis Chen Financial Protection Services, and we've created this." I handed my father a folder containing documentation for a trust we had established, a financial structure designed specifically to provide long-term security for my parents with contributions from both Rachel and me. "It's a protection mechanism," I explained as Dad reviewed the papers. "The trust will receive our monthly contributions, manage the investments, and provide you with regular income that's shielded from potential future complications. No one can empty these accounts without multiple authorizations and documented, legitimate purpose." Mom looked between Rachel and me, tears welling in her eyes. "After everything that happened, you two are still taking care of us. And even more remarkably, you're working together to do it." "We learned from the best," Rachel said softly. "You and Dad always put family first. It just took me longer to understand what that really means." As we raised our glasses to toast 4 decades of my parents' marriage, I reflected on the unexpected journey of the past months. What had begun with a devastating discovery, my sister emptying our parents' accounts for her wedding, had ultimately led to a more authentic family connection than we'd had in years. The path hadn't been easy. There had been public humiliation, legal complications, financial sacrifices, and painful revelations. Yet somehow, through it all, we had emerged stronger, not despite the challenges, but because of how we had faced them together. Later that evening, as I walked Rachel to her car, she paused under the restaurant's awning. "Do you think we would have found our way to this kind of relationship if everything hadn't imploded?" she asked. I considered the question honestly. Probably not. We were too set in our patterns. You as the golden child, me as the responsible one. We needed something to break those roles open. She nodded, pulling her light jacket closer against the evening breeze. I'm almost grateful in a strange way. Not for what happened to Mom and Dad, of course, but for the wake-up call. I was living a life built entirely on appearances. And now? A small, genuine smile crossed her face. Now I'm just living. No filters, no audience, no performance. It's terrifying and liberating all at once. We embraced before she drove away, the gesture natural in a way it hadn't been since childhood. As I watched her taillights disappear around the corner, my phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. "How was the anniversary dinner?" "Perfect," I replied simply. "Family is complicated, but worth fighting for." His response came quickly. "Speaking of fighting for what matters, dinner tomorrow? Just the two of us this time." I smiled at the message, typing back a confirmation before turning toward my own car. The future still held challenges. My parents' ongoing financial management, Rachel's continuing legal entanglements with the Miller family, the growth of our new business. But for the first time in months, these challenges felt manageable. The bank president had indeed called me ma'am at my sister's wedding, a moment of recognition that had set in motion events none of us could have predicted. But the true recognition, the deeper acknowledgement, had come later, in the trust. We were rebuilding as a family, in the purposeful work Jackson and I had created together, and in the knowledge that sometimes, from the most painful betrayals can come the most meaningful transformations. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.